Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. Today we're looking at a situation in northern Utah that has echoes of something very familiar to our team in Colorado Springs. O'Leary Ventures is backing a massive hyperscale data center initiative in Box Elder County, Utah. The Stratos project area has been approved at the state level through MIDA, which is the Military Installation Development Authority, that's federal, and the county commission has approved the interlocal agreement and consent resolution required for the project area to move forward. But now residents are organizing a referendum. They want to gather signatures, force the question to a ballot, and potentially overturn the county commission's action. So the question is simple: can a local special election overturn something that's been already approved by multiple layers of government? Well, the answer is it depends on exactly what was approved. Now, that may sound like a lawyer answer, and I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I think at this stage it is the right answer. In land development, people often confuse approval with entitlement, and they confuse entitlement with permission to build. Those are not the same thing. There are, in fact, multiple levels of approval. The Utah approval appears to be approval of a project area, an interlocal agreement, and a county consent to MIDA's involvement. The state's own public materials say this is not the full approval of every detail of the project. There will still be state permitting steps, including air quality, water rights, drinking water, water quality, and other technical reviews. That's an important distinction. If the referendum succeeds, it may not erase every possible path for the developer, but it could remove the county's consent and the negotiated agreement. In other words, it may not destroy the project outright, but it might remove the structure that made the project politically and procedurally workable. That is a risk. And this is where the parallel with Carmen Line, our project in Colorado Springs, could be important. Now, in Colorado Springs, the City Council approved the Carmen Line annexation. That meant the approval allowed for the property to be annexed into the city. It didn't actually approve the development. That would require subsequent level of approvals. Now, the approval of our project followed a staff review, planning commission review, public hearings, and 2 votes at City Council. The opponents then gathered enough signatures to force the issue to the voters. The election was held and voters rejected the ordinance. Now, from a developer's perspective, it looked like the project had been approved and then unapproved. And from the public's perspective, the democratic process worked exactly as designed. That is uncomfortable, and yet you can still satisfy the technical process and fail the political process. Now, Carmen Line was about annexation, about water, about growth, city services, and whether the development was a logical extension of the city boundary. The Utah data center is about power, water, air quality, rural identity, tax incentives, and distrust of a process that moved quickly. Now, the fact is, the acreage for this data center is not located close to anybody. There are no local residents for miles from this particular property. So first, a large project is advanced through formal government channels. The community feels the process moved faster than the public understanding. And the opponents simplify the issue into one question: do we want it or not? The developer is suddenly no longer underwriting just construction cost and the economics. They're underwriting the public trust. That's very difficult to model in a pro forma. The risk is not merely whether a referendum can legally overturn every approval. The risk is delay, it's litigation, it's political uncertainty, it's hesitation from lenders. Now, capital generally hates uncertainty. Construction pricing hates uncertainty. Even if the developer ultimately wins, the schedule can still be damaged. It could be months or years of delay, and that's not a rounding error. It can change the carrying costs, the debt assumptions, procurement, and ultimately the project's momentum. Now, we are seeing this across the country with data centers. In Wisconsin, Port Washington voters approved a referendum requiring voter approval for large future tax incremental financing districts. In Virginia, the Prince William Digital Gateways faced years of organized opposition and legal challenge after a major data center rezoning. These fights are not isolated. The lesson is not that development should stop. The lesson is that community consent must be treated as part of the process. The unfortunate truth is, the opposition is based on emotional arguments, where the proponents are in fact trying to argue against an emotional argument with facts. Facts often are ignored when it comes to an emotional argument. I've seen some of the advertisements that have been published in the last few days about this particular data center project. Part of the claim is that the water level in Lake Mead is in fact going to be further damaged by the presence of this data center. That statement is factually incorrect. But it doesn't matter. Once that linkage has been made in the mind of the voting public, it's very difficult to disconnect that. even if you're providing the correct facts. We had the same issue with Carmen Line. It wasn't just about housing. The opponents were claiming that the city would be saddled with additional costs as a result of the annexation. That was factually untrue. Being factually correct doesn't mean you're going to win the political battle. So the ultimate question is, does the general public have a right to say what happens on a property that is privately owned that's miles away from where they live? It challenges the fundamental concept of private property rights. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.